Good morning. Can you hear me better now? Well, I'm going to resist the temptation to tell you what Paul was like as a Duke student.
Amen. Preach on.
But I will brag on him a little. Back during the time he was a Duke student with my husband, I had a 15-month-old child, and I had a severe back problem, a ruptured disc. And the weekend we were supposed to move to our new appointment, I was in the hospital getting a CAT scan. Needless to say, I wasn't going to be lifting and hauling boxes, and I was in a panic. And Jamie and Paul pulled us out of that ditch, and I'm forever grateful for that and their friendship through the years. I want to share with you some experiences I've had in Haiti, and I apologize ahead of time. My husband says I have one radio frequency, and it's Haiti 24/7 News Hour. So you'll forgive me, but it has captured my heart, and I've had many experiences there that are among the deepest that I've ever had in my life, short of meeting my husband and having my children. I want to talk to you about days that change our lives. We all have these days. We meet our spouse for the first time and we have this knowing about them that they're special, or the day we're told we're pregnant or our child is born. And then there are days that change our lives in not so great ways, like the day the doctor says, you need to come back to the office and meet with me. I have your test results. Well, I've had at least 5 or 6 days in Haiti that absolutely rocked me to my knees spiritually. And I want to start with one that many people know about, and it is the day of January 12th, 2010. You see, I usually go to the north end of the island to a town called Cap-Haïtien, which is the second largest city in Haiti. And I did that because my husband's church at the time, Providence Methodist in Charlotte, had a 30-year ministry there of a medical clinic. They work with a primary school, and they do microcredit lending. And I was very involved in that ministry, and we were planning to take a team to Cap-Haïtien on January 14th. So my husband said, look, they're having this conference in Port-au-Prince. Why don't you go to it? You'll just have to go a couple of days early, and then you can fly up to the north end of the island to meet everybody, and you'll get to meet all these people at UMCOR, and you can represent our ministry to the Methodist Church of Haiti, and they're inviting a few churches like ourselves, so why don't you go? So I always blame my husband for the fact that I was in an earthquake, but it's all his fault. That really works well in my family, just to blame it on him. But anyway, I did go to Port-au-Prince for this conference. The conference was between the Methodist Church of Haiti and UMCOR, and they had invited a few churches with a long-time footprint in Haiti. And the discussion was about how to do ministry better together. So I'd been there on Tuesday, January 12th, for the entire day, in a room about the size of this sanctuary and listening to lectures. It was a very, very long day. About 4:15, 4:30, they dismissed the group, and I went back to the guest house, which is there in Pétionville near Port-au-Prince. And I had gone upstairs to the second story of the guest house to email my husband. They had a computer there. And I was at the computer typing away when the shaking began. Now, I have been in an earthquake before. Have any of you? I've been in an earthquake before, but I kind of sensed immediately that this was a little different than the little trembler I had been in Italy about 30 years earlier as a student. What I remember was what was told to me in Italy, which is, if we have another one, the thing you need to do is run to a doorway, because there's more structural support in a doorway than if we were standing here and the ceiling caved in on us. So knowing that, sensing that this earthquake was quite strong, I immediately began to weigh my options for a doorway. There was one behind me in the center of the house. It would have required that I go around the banister, down half the flight of stairs, the landing, the other half of stairs, through 2 rooms, out a patio to get to daylight. And I feared that I would die in the stairwell and never reach daylight. The other option for me was to my right. And it was a sliding glass door, and off of that sliding glass door was a tiny, tiny, maybe 3-foot deep balcony. And I could see daylight out of that balcony, even though they had the security bars there. So I ran to that doorway. Now, that decision-making process took me about 2 seconds. I know that sounds drawn out, but you think pretty quickly when you think you're going to die. So I ran to that doorway. The sliding glass doorway was open, and I braced myself on the bottom at the top, and I held on. And I held on, and I looked to my left, and on the balcony there was a padlock on those bars. My next thought was, well, maybe this balcony will fall off and I can jump. And midway through all the shaking, I remember thinking, I'm going to die. There's no way this house can hold up to this kind of shaking. It was violent. And I said a prayer. I said, God, thank you for the life I've had. I have been so blessed. And if I don't make it out of this, I just want to say thank you. Now, I don't know why I gave God permission to take me, Paul. I think back now, and I think I should have been saying, save me. But at the time, it just seemed the thing that came from my heart. And in the next thought, saying that to God, I thought of my children and how desperately I wanted to be there for my children as they grew up, to see my children marry and have their first child and to be there to help them. So I thought better of giving God permission to take me. Well, after 35 seconds, the shaking stopped. And what I heard as I was running from the house to daylight, in fear that the shaking would begin again, what I heard was the screams of school children, a huge roar of people crying. I ran downstairs and outside, and everyone who had been at the house, the guest house, was safe. The schools behind the guest house were where all the children were. And I feared that there were injured, so kind of instinctively as a mother, I ran to the schoolyard. And what I saw was a sea of children and teachers and administrators shaking and crying and holding on to one another in fear. They had mostly escaped their buildings safe. There was some damage, but no crushing injuries. And I remember one small child, and she was stumbling in the courtyard in the playground area, and no one was comforting her. And she was crying hysterically. And I remember going up to her and grabbing her and saying, it'll be all right, and soothing her like a mother will do. And I realized she can't understand what I'm saying. She speaks Creole. I speak English. But soon her cries calmed down. And I thought, I need to go back to the front of the house to my friends and survey the damage. And I let go of her. And she immediately began to scream at the top of her lungs again and stumbled toward the gate, which kept the children inside the courtyard and not in the street. Someone had opened the gate, and I fear she walked out into the mayhem to try to find her way home. When I walked around back to the driveway around the corner of the house, what I found was that the injured had come to the driveway area to find assistance. I guess they thought the guest house would have bandages or people that knew how to treat the injured. And there were among us people who had served in volunteer and mission teams who had been trained to be first responders, and they began to treat the sick. I am not a nurse, and I am not a doctor. I don't know CPR. I know Bactine or antiseptic spray and a Band-Aid. That's the extent of my medical knowledge. So what I decided was that I would try to help those who knew what they were doing. So I would go up to my friend Tom and say, Tom, what do you need me to do? And I would do whatever he said. Well, one time I asked Tom, I finished that task, what do you want me to do next? And Tom said, this elderly woman that I'm with here, who's laying down in the back of this pickup truck, she is scared to death. I don't think she's injured. I think she's just truly, truly frightened, and she thinks she's having a heart attack. I want you to stay with her and try to calm her down, because I know I need to go help other people. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I grabbed her hand, and Tom went away, and she took her hand and held it to her chest, and she's talking in Creole just as fast as you can imagine, and I can feel her heart against her chest going ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. And she's obviously frantic. And I thought, how am I going to calm her? And I tried to soothe her and stroke her hair, and at one point I had this thought, the many times I had been to Haiti, that the children, the school children, would always sing, How Great Thou Art. And so I began to sing it because I knew she would not understand English, but she would understand the tune. And I sang that song to her, and she calmed down, and she began to cry. And I realized that the song was just as much for me as for her. That first night, I slept in a van in the driveway because there were so many aftershocks. There was a house next door to the guest house that had collapsed, and there were 3 sisters who lived there. One was crushed between the second and third story. You could see her. One had been struggling to get out of the house, and they had dug her out near the front door and brought her to a vehicle in the driveway, and they were treating her as best they could, but she was dying. And the third sister had been in the market during the earthquake and had come home to find her only surviving sister struggling to live and one dead. She too slept in the driveway, sat in a chair with a towel wrapped around her shoulder, and she rocked and sang and cried and prayed God mercy to save her sister. And I heard this all night long, and she would sing and cry out to Jesus. I could hear in the night the chorus of hundreds of people singing in the night and begging God for mercy. And this went on for hours. When there would be an aftershock, the song would stop and the cries of fear would rise. And when the aftershock stopped, the hymns would arise again. I remember deep into the night, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock, that I heard the last song they sang. And that song was Alleluia. The next morning we took a driver and a vehicle, and we made our way to the Hotel Montana, where 3 of our denominational leaders had gone for a meeting to discuss health care. We knew they were at the Montana because the driver had dropped them off and was headed down the driveway of the Montana back to the guest house. When he was on that driveway, the earthquake began. We had been trying to reach them by text and email or any way that we could, and no response. We found all the things in the city the next morning that you saw on TV, the dead beginning to pile on the street, the injured, the people frantically digging with their bare hands into crumbled pieces of concrete trying to find the one they loved. It was truly, truly tragic to watch. We made it halfway to the Montana, and we could not go further because of the rubble, and we walked the last mile and finally reached our destination, only to find an unrecognizable landscape. We walked round and round the Montana to try to find them, Clint Rabb and Sam Dixon and Jim Gully, and could not. And we encountered there the students from Lynn University that many of you saw their parents probably talking on CNN, and they were sitting in the grass with the crumbled hotel behind them, waiting for someone to come and help them, because some of their group was in the collapsed building behind them. When we could not find our friends, we returned to the guest house and decided that supplies were getting low in the house, water and food. We had been able, because of a satellite uplink and a solar-powered electrical system, to email our families and let them know we were okay. But we sensed that the situation would not improve, and we decided that the next morning, which would be Thursday morning, we would go to the airport to try to go home. We cleared out unnecessary items from our suitcase to become a little lighter in this journey we had ahead, and we got up the next morning to go to the airport. There were 8 of us. When we got to the airport, it was a sea of people pressed against a building. About a half an hour before we were told the doors would open, a gentleman in Navy fatigues comes out, and he stands in the middle of the crowd and he says, "Attention, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in this building. I've surveyed the damage. I'm an engineer, and this building has lost structural support. And if I were you, I would not go in this building." 4 of the people in our group who were from another denomination were pressed up against the building, and they persisted in getting into the building when the doors opened, and they actually walked out the other side of the terminal and booked a charter flight to the Dominican Republic. But the Methodist among our group, the 4 Methodists, I kind of looked at my roommate and she looked at me, and I thought, I've survived 40 or more aftershocks, and I've survived the big one, and I've survived all of this, and I'm not going to die in a terminal with the next aftershock. I'm not going in. Y'all can go, but I'm not going in. So we sat there at that terminal. She felt the same way. The others concurred. The 4 of us remaining sat at the terminal all day long. And they formed us in rows and had us hold up our U.S. passport, and they said, "The planes are coming." We had heard them the night before. All night long, we could hear the planes roar in the night. And we held up our passports and tried to be ready. It was very chaotic. In fact, I would say it was the scariest time during the earthquake for me, because we were running out of food and water, and we were standing in the blistering sunshine. At one point, they came around the corner and said, "We have a plane ready, we can take so many," and before I knew it, 2 of the group had gone, and that just left Patty and myself. And Patty looked at me and I looked at her, and we began to wonder what was going to happen. I had about this much water left in a water bottle, and I began to search for supplies. Patty said, "I see Haitians coming up to the back of the gate with styrofoam box lunches of rice and beans. Why don't we see if someone will bring us a soda pop and some rice and beans?" She says, "I have some Haitian money." So she goes back to the gate and gives the money. And in that moment, I think, they have no reason to return. They have our money. Will they come back? 20 minutes later, a Haitian woman came back with a boxed lunch and 2 soda pops. And I had not eaten all day. We ate that meal. There was 1 fork. And Patty took a bite and then would hand the fork to me, and I would take a bite. And we got through half the meal. And I said, "I can't eat anymore. My stomach is just nervous, and maybe we should just save this. We don't know. We might need it later." I didn't know if we'd be there for days. Patty said, "Yeah, I think you're right." About that time, at that same gate where we had met the Haitian woman, given her our money, I began to hear this man say, "Grand Goût, Grand Goût, hey lady, Grand Goût." Grand Goût is a word that means hungry, hungry. Please, lady, give me your rice and beans. I'm hungry. And the rational side of my brain says, hang on to that food, you may need it. Don't give that up. But the Spirit, I believe, said to me, give this man your food. Give this man your food. He persisted, and finally I said to Patty, I can't keep this food. I can't stand to keep this food when somebody is begging me for it. And I knew I would probably get home, but he was not. He was home. So we gave him the box lunch. And at the moment I handed it over, that scripture came to me, cast your bread on the waters. Do you know that scripture? And it will come back to you. Well, in the next moment, I had this thought, born of experience, which is, you should never eat street vendor food or you can become violently ill. Have you ever been on a cruise? Gotten sick? Well, I have been violently ill in Haiti, so I always take Cipro with me for those occasions. And not knowing if I would be there for many more days, I thought the idea of becoming completely dehydrated in a situation where water was running out could truly be life-threatening. So I told Patty, I think we ought to take a Cipro, and I have some. She said, I think so too. So I get out my Cipro bottle and open it, and my physician is a close friend, and I guess he wanted to be on the safe side, and he gave me the strongest milligram dosage of Cipro that you can imagine. The pill was enormous, 750 milligrams. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm not going to get this down. And then I thought, we can split it. So I handed the pill to Patty and she broke off half, and then I ate the other half. And between that rice and bean meal that we shared and the Cipro, in that moment as we shared, I realized God was with us. It was like communion. I've never felt the presence of God more fully in my life in communion. I know it wasn't bread and wine, but Christ was there with us. It began to be dark, and Patty and I did not yet have any assurance that we would get on a flight, and we began to think that it would be unsafe to stay at the airport. We were lucky enough to find a UN driver, Danica, and she agreed to drive us to the embassy. I did not know where the embassy was in Port-au-Prince. I could never have found it myself. But she drove us from the airport to the front door, and I handed my passport as I entered that door, and I felt safety surround me. And I will tell you that I will be forever grateful to servicemen and women who came and the personnel of the State Department that assured my safety from then home. They fed us a military meal ready to eat. Has anybody ever had one of those? It's like eating cardboard. And I remember thinking, this is the worst biscuit I have ever had in my life. I don't even know why I'm eating it. And then I thought of every Haitian who would not eat for days, and I asked God to forgive me. Just after midnight, they came into the waiting area. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in the waiting area at the embassy, and they said, if you can leave with a bag that's small enough to fit on your lap, come to this door with your passport and we will take you to the airport to go home. I had a big bag and a small bag. They had asked us to keep the big bags out on the lawn so it wouldn't clutter up the interior space, probably because if there was another aftershock, they didn't want people stumbling on it to get out. But my big bag was outside. I quickly went outside and I dug through it, and I took anything that was essential from it, and I left a whole lot of stuff I can buy at Walmart again on that lawn there in Port-au-Prince at the embassy. I stuffed my little bitty bag that fits under, a seat in the airplane and made my way to the door. Patty did not want to leave. She had some equipment that she felt responsible for that she was going to use for a work team, and she wanted to get that back home. She did eventually get home. But I went to that corner with my passport, and they drove us in huge Suburbans through the gates of the embassy and onto the tarmac. And I walked up the back end of a cargo plane and sat down, and there was a Air Force guy on the plane, and I said, "Sir, do you mind telling me where we're going?" I was exhausted, and I hadn't eaten much. I hadn't showered. I was too afraid to go in the building to shower, and I needed some sort of word about what would happen next. And he said, "Well, ma'am, I think we're going to New Jersey, but we might go to Miami. But I think it's New Jersey." And I said, "That's okay with me. It has U.S. beside it. If you wrote it out, there'd be USA at the end." I didn't want to go to the Dominican Republic and have to wait days to get home. So I remember at that moment when I asked him, "Do you know where we're going?" that was exactly what people felt like when they got on a plane in New Orleans to leave. They had no idea where they were going. They just knew they were going to be safe. I arrived in New Jersey early in the morning. I called my husband and then my mother, and then I called U.S. Air and made a reservation to get home. I stood in a line for a shuttle, took a 45-minute ride to Philadelphia Airport. This is January 15th, early in the morning. I had on sandals, thin capris, and a cotton shirt, and this bag. They let me out at the wrong terminal. And so I made my way from one terminal to the other on foot in the middle of January, and I was freezing, and I was dirty, and I looked filthy. And I remember thinking, people who look at me think I'm homeless. They think I'm just this person who, does this all the time and probably has a grocery cart somewhere. And I remember thinking how we really don't know, do we? We really don't know the stories of people we see that look like that. I got home about noon. I learned the next day that Jim Gully survived, but Sam Dixon and Clint Rabb did not. I learned that there was a great interest here in what was going on. I learned that it had been a 7.0 earthquake. I learned that I could shake for a long time afterwards thinking about it. I learned that when you take off clothes that have the dust from an earthquake, that what you think about is that people died in that dust. I could not wash my clothes for months for thinking about what would be lost when the washing machine would drain that dirty water away. All those things obviously left me with an impression about what it means to be in a catastrophe and how vulnerable you can feel so quickly. But I'm going to take 2 more minutes, and I promise I'll make it quick, to tell you how that was not the day in Haiti that changed my life forever. That day happened 4 years earlier, and it was my first trip to Haiti. I had gone there to be the good minister's wife, to support the ministry in Haiti that Providence had, and I was serving on a medical team. They asked me to weigh and measure babies, and I thought, I'm a mom, I can do that. So I'd done that for several days. When I believe it was Wednesday, I turned around after dropping a chart on a table and saw this elderly woman hunched over. She looked kind of like Mother Teresa, and she had all these towels in her hand, and nobody had called her name. And she swung back the towel, and these 2 tiny eyes began to look at me. It was a very small infant, and I knew instinctively something was wrong with this baby. I ran to get the medical director, who's a pediatrician, and I said, "Ray, you have to come quick. This baby looks like it's going to die any second. I don't know I'm afraid to touch it." Well, the story unfolded that the mother had become pregnant late in life with this infant, unexpectedly, of course, and her husband had injured himself and been unable to work for months, and the family was starving. The mother had this infant child 3 days earlier and did not have the emotional or physical resources to nurse this child, and the child was almost completely dehydrated. I watched as they laid this baby on a folding church table in the treatment room. And they took a tiny flexible tube about the diameter of inside of a Bic pen barrel, and they threaded it down the baby's nose and into its stomach, and with a little syringe attached at one end, they slowly pushed sugar water into this baby's stomach, slowly so it would not aspirate on the fluid. They asked me to take a turn while one of the nurses was giving a shot, and she directed me, and I sat there, pushed on that syringe, and I watched that baby come back to life like a sponge. And so at one point, I asked the interpreter, would you ask this grandmother what the name of this baby is? And I will never forget this moment, because the interpreter told me that that baby's name was Lovely. And I thought how tragic that a child that could be named Lovely could come so close to death over the simple need of fluid. My next thought was of the woman who 30 years before had begun this clinic, Alice. And I thought, what if Alice and her husband, Bill, had come to Haiti 30 years ago as they had done and seen all the misery and the poverty and the trash, and what if they had said, you know, you can't do a thing about that place, it never gets any better, what can you do? But that's not what they did 30 years ago. They came home and they said this, we have to do something. We have to do something. And so they did something. And their friends helped them do something. And 30 years later, there was a child sitting on this table that was brought back to life and had a chance because she did something. And the next thought I had was from God, what's the something you're going to do, Pam? What's the something you're going to do? That's the day that changed everything for me. I'm not as gifted as many ministers. I'm not as gifted as many of you maybe. But I realized that God had something He wanted me to do, and I've tried to listen to that ever since. I hope that you have a day like that that changes everything for you, in which God tells you you have a something that needs to be done. There's something you can do to contribute, and it will change lives. It will change things. Let us pray. God, I thank you for every good and perfect gift you bring to our lives, and for the call of the Spirit to lead us to action. Help us all to know that we have something to offer, that there is a gift within us which others need. Lead us and guide us in listening to your Spirit in all things. Amen. I will ask you, in the interest of time, go home and read Psalm 107. I read that psalm when I got home, and it reminded me of all the struggles of the Haitian people. I know that there are many among you who do care, and I ask you just to keep caring. Thank you.